When a firefighter, a man who's spent his entire life saving people from flames, tells you that someone is planning to burn him alive, you understand the world has turned upside down. Mike Kelly had been running into burning buildings for 22 years while everyone else ran away. He'd pulled more than 100 people from the jaws of death, including my younger brother 10 years ago. But sitting across from me in Murphy's Cafe, his hands weren't shaking from fear of fire. They were shaking from fear of betrayal. "Riley," he said, his voice barely steady, "I think my wife wants to kill me using the one thing that could break a firefighter from the inside out." The fluorescent lights of the little cafe cast harsh shadows across Mike's weathered face. Even in civilian clothes, he carried himself with the confident posture of a man who'd spent decades charging into situations where others feared to tread. But today, something was different. The calm assurance that came from knowing how to handle any emergency had been replaced by the bewildered look of a man whose world no longer made sense. I'd known Mike Kelly for 10 years, ever since the night that changed both our lives forever. It was March 15th, 2014, and my younger brother Sean was trapped on the 4th floor of a burning apartment building on the south side. I'd arrived at the scene just as Engine Company 18 pulled up, sirens wailing and lights cutting through the smoke-filled darkness. I can still see it like it was yesterday. Mike Kelly in full gear, oxygen tank strapped to his back, rushing into that inferno without hesitation. The building was a death trap, an old structure with faulty wiring and no proper fire exits. But Mike and his crew went in anyway because that's what firefighters do. They save people. Mike personally carried Sean out of that building. He performed CPR on him for 8 minutes straight, while the paramedics worked to get a pulse. But the smoke inhalation had done too much damage. My 28-year-old brother died 2 days later in the hospital, never regaining consciousness. At the funeral, Mike approached me with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry I couldn't save him," he said. "I've replayed that night 1,000 times, wondering what I could have done differently." "You risked your life trying," I told him. "That's more than most people would do." From that day forward, we'd maintained a friendship built on mutual respect and shared grief. Mike never stopped blaming himself for Sean's death, and I never stopped being grateful that he'd tried everything humanly possible to save my brother. To me, firefighters weren't just public servants. They were heroes who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. Now, 10 years later, Mike Kelly looked like a man who'd seen his faith in everything he believed shattered. "Tell me what's happening," I said, settling back in the worn vinyl booth. Mike pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the table. Inside was a life insurance policy, $2 million, with a double indemnity clause for death in the line of duty. The policy was dated 3 months ago. "I never signed this, Riley. Never even saw it until yesterday when I was looking for our property tax documents." Mike's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Jenny handled all our finances, said it was easier that way. But a $4 million payout if I die on the job? That's not protecting our future. That's betting against my survival." I studied the document carefully. Everything looked legitimate. Official letterhead, proper signatures, notary stamp. But the signature purporting to be Mike's looked slightly off, as if someone had been practicing his handwriting. "Where did you find this?" "Hidden in Jenny's home office behind some old files." "And that's not the worst part." Mike reached into his jacket and pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind firefighters sometimes use to document incident reports. "Last week, Jenny thought I was working a double shift, but we got called back early. I came home and heard her on the phone in her office." He pressed play. Jenny's voice filled the small space between us, clear and unmistakable. "Friday night would be perfect. Mike always sleeps heavily after a night shift, and the neighbors are used to hearing sirens in our area. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." The recording continued for another 30 seconds. discussion of timing, logistics, and something about making it look accidental. Then the sound cut off. Jesus, Mike, have you called the police? And tell them what? That my wife of 12 years is planning to kill me based on a partial phone conversation? They'd think I was paranoid, suffering from job stress. Mike rubbed his forehead. Besides, I need to know for sure. If I'm wrong about Jenny, if there's some innocent explanation, but if you're right, then the woman I've shared my bed with for 12 years has been planning my murder. The weight of that possibility hung in the air between us. I'd worked hundreds of cases involving spousal betrayal, but there was something particularly chilling about a plot that involved using fire, the very element that defined Mike's professional life, as a weapon against him. Mike, I need to ask you some hard questions. Has Jenny's behavior changed recently? Any new friends? Unexplained absences? Changes in spending habits? She's been working late more often, claims it's busy season at the insurance company. But when I called to take her dinner last week, they said she'd left hours earlier. Mike paused. And she's been asking strange questions about my job. Mortality statistics for firefighters, what happens to pension benefits if I die in the line of duty, whether the department has protocols for investigating suspicious fires. What kind of insurance company does she work for? Property and casualty. Specializes in homeowners' policies. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Mike, I'm going to take this case, but I need you to promise me something. Don't change your routine, don't confront Jenny, and don't do anything that might tip her off that you're suspicious. How long do you think we have? I looked at the insurance policy again, noting the effective date and terms. If someone's planning to collect on this, they'll want to wait at least 6 months to avoid scrutiny. But the way Jenny was talking about Friday night, I think we're dealing with a much shorter timeline. 3 days later, I was parked outside Midwestern Mutual Insurance at 5:30 p.m., watching employees file out of the glass-fronted building. Jenny Kelly emerged at 5:45, moving with the brisk efficiency of someone who had important places to be. She was an attractive woman in her late 30s, professionally dressed in a way that suggested she cared about her appearance. Jenny got into a BMW, a car that seemed slightly above the pay grade of an insurance company middle manager married to a city employee, and pulled out of the parking lot. Instead of heading toward the Kelly home in Bridgeport, she drove north into the affluent Lincoln Park neighborhood. I followed her through the early evening traffic, staying far enough back to avoid detection. Jenny drove like someone familiar with surveillance techniques, checking her mirrors frequently, taking unexpected turns, varying her speed. It was the behavior of someone who didn't want to be followed. 20 minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot of an upscale steakhouse called the Capitol Grill. She chose a parking spot with a clear view of the entrance and sat in her car for several minutes, apparently waiting for someone. At 6:15, a silver Porsche Cayenne pulled up beside her. The driver was a man in his early 50s, well-dressed in an expensive suit that screamed, "Successful businessman." He was tall, with graying hair and the kind of confident bearing that comes from money and power. I watched as Jenny got out of her car and embraced the man, not the casual hug of business associates, but the intimate embrace of lovers. They walked into the restaurant together, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. I waited 5 minutes, then followed them inside. The Capitol Grill was the kind of place where deals were made and secrets were shared, dimly lit with private booths and attentive waiters who knew when not to interrupt. I managed to get a table with a partial view of where Jenny and her companion were seated. Over the next hour, I observed their interaction carefully. Their body language screamed intimacy, leaning close to whisper, touching hands across the table, the kind of focused attention that exists between people who are sleeping together. But there was something else in their conversation, an intensity that suggested they were discussing more than just their affair. I couldn't hear their words from where I sat. but I could read lips well enough to catch fragments. Friday night, accelerant, electrical fire, and most chillingly, make sure he's asleep. When they finished dinner, I followed them outside and watched as they had an animated discussion beside their cars. The man, who I'd later identify as Rex Thornton, a prominent real estate developer, handed Jenny a small package wrapped in brown paper. She tucked it into her purse quickly, glancing around nervously. Before they parted, Thornton pulled Jenny close and said something that made her smile, the kind of smile a woman gives when she's been promised something she desperately wants. The next morning, I began researching Rex Thornton. What I found made my blood run cold. Thornton wasn't just any developer. He was the CEO of Thornton Development Group, a company that specialized in buying up distressed properties in gentrifying neighborhoods and converting them into luxury condominiums. Over the past 5 years, his company had acquired dozens of properties under suspicious circumstances. More troubling was the pattern I discovered when I cross-referenced property acquisitions with fire department incident reports. In 7 cases over the past 3 years, homes in neighborhoods targeted by Thornton Development had suffered devastating fires just months before the company made acquisition offers to traumatized owners. The fires all shared certain characteristics. They occurred during off-peak hours, when fire department response might be delayed. They involved accelerants that made them burn unusually hot and fast, and they always resulted in total losses that made rebuilding financially impossible for the owners. In each case, Thornton Development had swooped in within weeks of the fire, offering cash settlements that seemed generous to desperate homeowners, but were actually far below the property's true development value. But what made my stomach turn was the discovery that one of those fires, a house fire on the south side 18 months ago, had killed an entire family of 4, including 2 young children. The fire department had ruled it an accident caused by faulty wiring, but the speed and intensity of the blaze had raised questions that were never fully answered. Rex Thornton wasn't just Jenny's lover. He was a serial arsonist who used fire as a tool for real estate acquisition and murder. That evening, I met Mike at a bar near his firehouse. He looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from carrying an impossible burden. "I keep thinking there has to be some mistake," he said, staring into his untouched beer. 12 years of marriage, Riley. We had our problems, sure, but murder? How do you live with someone for 12 years and not see that they're capable of planning your death? People are capable of hiding a lot when they're motivated by money and desperation. But Jenny never seemed motivated by money. She always said she married me because I was one of the good guys, someone who put service before profit. Mike's voice cracked slightly. Was it all an act? Every "I love you," every time she worried about me coming home safe. Was she just waiting for the right moment to cash in? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging or you'll get burned. This is your only warning." I showed the message to Mike. His jaw tightened with the kind of controlled anger I'd seen in combat veterans. "They know you're investigating." "Which means we're running out of time." I finished my beer and stood up. "Mike, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not go home tonight. Stay at the firehouse, volunteer for extra shifts, find any excuse to not be alone in that house." "You think they're moving that fast?" "I think they're panicking, and panicked people make dangerous mistakes." The next morning brought the crisis I'd been dreading. Mike called me at 6 a.m., his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Riley, I came home early from my shift and found something in the garage. You need to get over here right now." I drove to the Kelly house as fast as traffic would allow. Mike met me at the front door, his face pale and drawn. Without saying a word, he led me through the house to the attached garage. In the corner, partially hidden behind gardening equipment, were 3 red gasoline containers. Beside them was a cardboard box containing what looked like electronic devices, small black rectangles with wires and digital displays. "Jenny said these were for the lawnmower," Mike said, his voice hollow. "But Riley, we have an electric lawnmower, have had one for 3 years." I knelt down and examined the devices more closely. They were sophisticated incendiary devices, remote-controlled ignition systems designed to start fires from a distance, the kind of equipment used by professional arsonists. Jesus Christ, Mike, these aren't just for burning down your house, they're for making sure you don't escape. Mike was staring at the devices with the expression of a man whose world had completely collapsed. She was really going to do it. She was going to burn me alive in my own home. Where is Jenny now? Left this morning for a business trip to Milwaukee, said she'd be gone until Sunday. Mike looked up at me. "Riley, what if I hadn't come home early? What if I'd found these on Friday night instead of Thursday morning?" The timing was too convenient. Jenny's sudden trip, the discovery of the arsonist equipment, the pattern we'd observed, everything pointed to Friday night being the planned date for Mike's murder. "We need to call the police," I said. "This is evidence of a conspiracy to commit murder." "With what? Jenny can claim someone else put these here, that she never saw them before. And those recordings could be explained away as planning a surprise party or talking about someone else entirely." Mike stood up, his firefighters' training taking over. "We need more evidence. We need to catch them in the act." That's when I made a decision that probably saved Mike's life. "No, Mike, we need to get you somewhere safe and let the professionals handle this." But even as I said it, I knew Mike Kelly wasn't the kind of man who would run from a fight. He'd spent 22 years running toward danger, and he wasn't about to start hiding now. What I didn't know was that while we were arguing in the garage, Jenny Kelly was already implementing the final phase of her plan. The call came at 11:30 that night. Mike's voice on the phone was thick with smoke and adrenaline. "Riley, the house is on fire. The whole damn house is going up." I could hear sirens in the background, the shouts of firefighters, and underneath it all, the hungry roar of flames consuming everything in their path. "Are you hurt? Are you safe?" "I'm out, but barely. Riley, this wasn't an accident. I woke up to the smell of smoke and the sound of something burning downstairs. By the time I got to the hallway, the whole first floor was engulfed. How did you get out?" "Bedroom window. Second-story drop into the neighbor's hedge." Mike coughed, and I could hear the strain in his voice. "Riley, this fire isn't behaving naturally. It's burning too hot, too fast. Someone used accelerants." I was already in my car, racing toward the Kelly house. "Mike, where are you now?" "Across the street with the neighbors. Engine 18 is here, plus 2 ladder companies. But, Riley—" Mike's voice dropped to a whisper. "I think I know why they did it tonight instead of waiting until Friday." "What do you mean?" "Jenny came home an hour ago, said her business trip was canceled, that she wanted to surprise me. She made dinner, opened a bottle of wine, was being more affectionate than she'd been in months." Mike paused. "Riley, I think she drugged me. I felt dizzy during dinner, could barely stay awake. If the smoke hadn't woken me up when it did." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Jenny hadn't just planned to kill Mike in a house fire. She'd planned to drug him first, ensuring he'd never wake up, never have a chance to escape. It was cold-blooded murder disguised as tragic accident. "Mike, where is Jenny now?" "That's the thing, Riley. She's not here. After dinner, she said she was going to the store for dessert. That was 2 hours ago. I arrived at the scene to find the Kelly house completely engulfed in flames. The fire was indeed behaving unnaturally, burning with an intensity that suggested professional-grade accelerants and multiple ignition points. This wasn't just arson. It was a carefully planned execution. Mike was standing across the street, wrapped in a blanket provided by paramedics, watching 22 years of memories disappear in a column of orange flame and black smoke. His face was streaked with soot, and his hands showed minor burns from his escape. But he was alive. "Any word from Jenny?" I asked. "Nothing. Her phone goes straight to voicemail." I watched the firefighters battle the blaze, their silhouettes stark against the hellish glow. The irony was bitter. Mike Kelly, who dedicated his life to fighting fires, watching helplessly as fire destroyed his own home. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Standing at the edge of the crowd of onlookers, partially hidden behind a parked car, was Rex Thornton. He was trying to blend in with the neighbors who'd come out to watch the spectacle, but his expensive suit and polished shoes marked him as someone who didn't belong in this working-class neighborhood. More troubling was his demeanor. While everyone else looked shocked or concerned, Thornton was watching the fire with the focused attention of someone monitoring a business transaction. He was checking his phone frequently, as if waiting for important news. I approached him carefully, positioning myself so he couldn't see me until I was close enough to speak. "Enjoying the show?" I asked. Thornton startled, clearly not expecting to be confronted. Up close, he was older than he'd appeared in the restaurant, probably mid-50s, with the kind of deep tan that comes from expensive vacations and the confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. "Excuse me?" I said, "Are you enjoying watching Mike Kelly's house burn down?" Thornton's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a concerned neighbor." Funny thing about concerned neighbors, they usually live in the neighborhood. I gestured toward the modest homes surrounding us. "Your Porsche seems a little out of place here." For just a moment, Thornton's mask slipped, and I saw something cold and calculating in his expression. Then he recovered his composure. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I should be going." "I don't think so." That's when Thornton made his first real mistake. Instead of continuing to play innocent, he leaned closer and lowered his voice to a threatening whisper. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Hunt. This is bigger than one house, bigger than one firefighter. Walk away now, or you'll find out what happens to people who interfere with legitimate business interests." The fact that he knew my name confirmed everything I'd suspected. Rex Thornton wasn't just Jenny's lover. He was the mastermind behind a conspiracy that went far beyond adultery and insurance fraud. "Where's Jenny?" I asked. Thornton smiled, and it was the kind of smile a predator gives right before striking. "Let's just say she's somewhere safe, celebrating the successful completion of a difficult project." Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Mike's number. "Riley, you need to get down here. The fire chief wants to talk to you." I found Mike and Fire Chief Patricia Kowalski standing near Engine 18, deep in conversation. Chief Kowalski was a 25-year veteran with the weathered face of someone who'd seen every kind of fire imaginable. "Mr. Hunt, Mike tells me you've been investigating threats against him. I think you need to hear what we've found." Chief Kowalski led us to the smoldering remains of the Kelly house. Even from 50 feet away, the heat was intense enough to make my eyes water. "This fire had at least 6 separate points of origin," she said, pointing to different areas of the structure. "Someone used accelerants throughout the house. Gasoline, probably mixed with diesel fuel, for a slower, hotter burn. The ignition sources were electronic, triggered remotely." "How can you be sure?" 25 years of experience plus these." She held up a small electronic device, partially melted but still recognizable as one of the ignition systems we'd found in Mike's garage. "We've pulled 4 of these so far. Whoever set this fire wanted to make absolutely sure the house burned completely and quickly. Mike was staring at the ruins of his home with the expression of a man processing the reality of his own near murder. "Chief," I said, "has anyone contacted you about investigating this fire as a potential homicide?" "That's what I wanted to discuss with you. We got a call about an hour ago from ATF. They're sending a team to take over this investigation. Apparently, this fire fits the pattern of several others they've been tracking." The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives only got involved in arson cases when they suspected federal crimes, racketeering, terrorism, or serial arson, across state lines. Did they say anything about the pattern? 7 similar fires over the past 3 years, all in neighborhoods undergoing gentrification. All the properties were acquired by the same development company within months of the fires. Chief Kowalski looked directly at me. "Mr. Hunt, I think your friend here was supposed to be victim number 8. An hour later, I was sitting in an ATF command vehicle with Special Agent Sarah Martinez, watching technicians process the crime scene. Agent Martinez was a compact woman in her 40s with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen the worst that people could do to each other. "We've been tracking Rex Thornton and his organization for 18 months, she said, reviewing files on her laptop. "What started as an investigation into insurance fraud became a homicide case when we realized the pattern of fires wasn't coincidental." "How many people has he killed?" 7 confirmed victims, including a family of 4 in a house fire on the south side. We believe there may be others." Agent Martinez turned the laptop screen toward me. "The problem has been proving it. Thornton's careful, uses intermediaries, covers his tracks well. We've never been able to get close enough to his operation to gather evidence. Until now." "Until now." "Your investigation into Jenny Kelly's activities gave us the missing piece we needed. We've been monitoring Thornton's communications for weeks, waiting for him to make his next move." I stared at the screen, which showed surveillance photos of Rex Thornton meeting with various associates over the past several months. In one photo, he was handing an envelope to a man in coveralls. In another, he was inspecting what looked like electronic equipment in the back of a van. "Agent Martinez, what about Jenny Kelly? Where is she?" "That's what we're trying to determine. She left the house 2 hours before the fire started, supposedly to buy dessert. Her car was found abandoned in a parking garage downtown, but there's no trace of her after that." A terrible possibility occurred to me. "Do you think Thornton killed her too?" "It's possible. In our experience, people like Thornton don't leave loose ends. If Jenny Kelly served her purpose—" Agent Martinez didn't need to finish the sentence. The next morning brought answers, but not the kind anyone wanted to hear. Jenny Kelly's body was found in the trunk of a rental car in a long-term parking lot at O'Hare Airport. She'd been shot once in the head, execution style. The medical examiner estimated she'd been dead for at least 12 hours, killed around the time the fire started at her house. Mike took the news with the stoic calm of someone who'd already processed the worst possibilities. We were sitting in his temporary quarters at the firehouse, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of his professional home. "She was going to help them kill me," he said quietly, "but in the end, they killed her too. Mike, I'm sorry. I know this doesn't make any of it easier. The strange thing is, I keep thinking about the early years of our marriage. Jenny wasn't always the person she became. When we first met, she seemed to genuinely care about my work, about the idea of serving the community." Mike stared out the window at the city skyline. "Something changed along the way. Maybe it was the stress of being married to someone whose job could kill him. Maybe it was wanting a different kind of life than what a firefighter's salary could provide. That doesn't excuse planning your murder." "No, it doesn't, but it helps me understand how she got to that point." Mike turned back to me. "Riley, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have mentioned earlier." A chill ran down my spine. "What is it?" 3 years ago there was a fire in Pilsen, a warehouse that was supposed to be empty. We got there and found evidence that someone had been living in the building illegally. Homeless people, probably, using it for shelter." Mike paused. "I was first through the door and I found accelerant containers in what used to be the main office, but by the time the investigators arrived, the containers were gone." "What happened to them?" "I moved them, hid them in my truck until after the investigation was completed." Mike's voice was barely above a whisper. "Riley, those people living in that warehouse, they would have been charged with arson if those containers had been found. I couldn't let that happen to people who were just trying to stay warm." "Mike, why are you telling me this now?" "Because yesterday, when we found those incendiary devices in my garage, I remembered something. One of the accelerant containers from that warehouse fire 3 years ago, I never threw it away. I kept it in my garage as evidence in case the real arsonists ever surfaced. The implications hit me like a truck. Jesus, Mike, if someone knew about that container, they could have used it to make me look like an arsonist, plant evidence in my garage, claim I'd been setting fires for years, use my access to crime scenes as proof of opportunity." Mike rubbed his forehead. "Riley, I think Jenny knew about that container. I think that's why she was so confident the plan would work, because they had a way to make me look guilty if anything went wrong." But Mike's revelation also gave me an idea. "Mike, do you still have that container?" "It wasn't in the garage when we found the other devices. Someone must have taken it. Or someone is planning to use it as evidence against you." That afternoon, Agent Martinez called with an update that changed everything. "We arrested Rex Thornton an hour ago," she said. "Found him at a private airfield trying to board a plane to the Cayman Islands. He had Jenny Kelly's purse with him, along with $2.3 million in cash and a briefcase full of incriminating documents." "What kind of documents?" "Insurance policies, property deeds, contracts with accelerant suppliers, and, most interesting, detailed plans for 8 different arson murders, including Mike Kelly's." I felt a surge of satisfaction that justice was finally being served. "There's more," Agent Martinez continued. "Thornton's talking. He's giving us names, dates, methods, everything. Apparently, the Kelly fire was supposed to be his retirement job. One more big payday, then disappear to a non-extradition country and live off his accumulated wealth." "What about the evidence against Mike? The accelerant container from the Pilsen fire?" "Thornton tried to use that as leverage, claimed Mike Kelly was his partner in the arson business. But his story fell apart when we pointed out that all his other victims were strangers to him, whereas Mike Kelly would have been an unnecessary risk if he were actually a partner." 3 months later, Rex Thornton was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The federal prosecutor had assembled an airtight case documenting 8 murders, dozens of arsons, and a racketeering conspiracy that had operated across 3 states. At the sentencing hearing, victim impact statements were read by family members of Thornton's victims. When Mike's turn came, he stood up and looked directly at the man who had tried to murder him. "You used fire as a weapon," Mike said, his voice steady and clear. "Fire is a natural force. It can destroy, but it can also purify and renew. You perverted that force, turned it into an instrument of greed and murder. But fire has a way of revealing truth, burning away lies, and leaving only what's real." After the hearing, Mike and I walked out of the federal courthouse into the bright Chicago sunshine. "So what's next?" I asked. "The department's offered me a promotion to battalion chief, but I'm thinking about staying where I am. I like being in the trucks, working directly with the community." Mike smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since this whole ordeal began. Besides, I met someone who appreciates what I do." "Oh?" "Sarah Connor. She's a nurse at Mercy General. I've brought patients to her ER dozens of times over the years, but we never really talked until after the fire. She came by the station to check on me, make sure I was dealing with the trauma okay." Mike's expression softened in a way I'd never seen before. "The thing about Sarah is, she understands the job. She sees the same kinds of emergencies I do, deals with the same life and death decisions. When I tell her about a difficult call, she doesn't worry about the danger. She asks about the people we saved." 6 months later, I attended Mike and Sarah's wedding at the firehouse. It was a simple ceremony, but filled with the kind of genuine warmth that had been missing from Mike's life for years. Sarah was a petite woman, with kind eyes and the quiet strength that comes from dedicating your life to helping others. During their vows, Mike said something that brought tears to my eyes. "Sarah, you've taught me that love isn't about finding someone who makes you feel safe. It's about finding someone who makes you brave enough to be your best self, even when the world is burning down around you." As for me, working on Mike Kelly's case reminded me why I became a private investigator in the first place. It's not about the money or the thrill of solving puzzles. It's about standing up for good people when the world seems determined to tear them down. The case file sits in my office cabinet now, next to dozens of others. But sometimes, when I drive past a firehouse and hear the wail of sirens heading toward an emergency, I think about Mike Kelly and the choice he makes every day to run toward danger so that others can run toward safety. In a world that often seems designed to reward greed and punish virtue, Mike Kelly's story stands as proof that good people can survive even the most calculated evil, not because they're lucky, but because they're surrounded by others who refuse to let darkness win. Fire can destroy everything you own, but it can't touch the things that really matter: courage, integrity, and the love of people who see your true worth. And sometimes, rising from the ashes of betrayal and loss, you find something better than what you had before. Not just survival, but genuine happiness. Mike Kelly learned that lesson the hard way. But in the end, the fire that was meant to destroy him only burned away the parts of his life that weren't real, leaving room for something true and lasting to grow. That's the thing about fire. It reveals everything, destroys lies, and leaves only what can withstand the heat. Mike Kelly withstood the heat, and in doing so, he found his way home.